Hello friends, today we're sketching and painting a little yellow parakeet. We're going to get to practice our wet and wet technique, a little bit of wet and dry, and we'll get to play with some bright complementary colors. Let's get into it. If you don't have the exact same supplies as me, the same paint colors, brushes, all of that, it does not matter. Just use whatever you have. You just need a bright yellow, and for the shadow tones inside of the parakeet, we're going to need something that's going to produce more of a green tone, but earthy. So I'm going to be using my ultramarine blue for that. And then for some of the pinkish tones inside of the little feet and the beak, we can use that to mix with our yellow. I'm going to be using quinacridone rose, also Daniel Smith. Hansa Yellow Light, quinacridone rose, and ultramarine blue, all primary colors and all by Daniel Smith, but if you don't have those exact same brands, that's totally okay. I'm trying out a new watercolor journal today. This is my Muffin watercolor paper from Amazon. It's 100% cotton, cold pressed, 140 pounds, 20 sheets, and I really like the spiral binding on it. I think that'll be quite nice. Cotton watercolor paper does work best to get the same effects that we're going for today. If you don't have that though, use just the best quality paper you have. We're going to start out with a sketch. Now, for many of you, sketching can be a little bit intimidating, but if you think in terms of more abstract shapes like circles, angles, triangles, alignments, and proportions, these are all things that can be measured, and it breaks down the process and makes it a little simpler. Now, I'm actually going to just prop up my board a little bit so I can see it at a slight angle. This prevents me from elongating my drawing too much. When you look at the reference photo, you can see the little budgie has quite a circular shape for the body and almost a triangular shape for the head. I'm going to use my kneaded eraser to erase any excess markings, and I'm going to press lightly at first so that I don't indent the paper. Okay, I'm going to have my little bird kind of off to the right a bit, not quite centered in the square composition. So I'm going to start with a rounded off triangle shape for the head, and then a circle shape, but it's not exactly a circle. When we're looking at shapes, we have to decide how wide, how tall, how round, and we have to compare those shapes to the other shapes that we're drawing. So I'm looking at this kind of cone shape that I made for the head and the shape of the body, and I can see that the distance from the top of the head to roughly where the neck is about a third of this entire length. A little bit bigger than a third. And I think I've got that about right. And then we're going to have a horizontal line for this little perch that our bird is sitting on. A couple little markings representing the feet, and then the tail feathers coming down. And these will be off the page. So we aren't going to get all those feathers in just because I want to make the bird's body a little bit bigger. So we aren't going to be able to accommodate all the tail feathers, but that's okay. Now that we've got a rough approximation of where we want to place everything, we can begin being more decisive with our markings. Coming back to the head again, the shape I have isn't exactly correct. The head is tilted somewhat. We see almost an eyebrow shape jutting to the left. Another way to think about your sketches is to look at the negative space, not necessarily the head shape itself, but what is the shape created by the white space next to the head. So observe shapes like that, and that will help you be more accurate with your sketching also. So I'm looking at that curved shape of white behind the bird's head, and then I can come back to looking at the rounded top of the head. How high is this rounded shape? How wide? Constantly glancing at my reference photo for guidance and comparing what I've just sketched with the reference photo. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but we want to make it as accurate as possible for the best results. So take your time with this sketch. Go as slow as you need to. All right, I'm erasing my excess lines. I want to decide on a couple of spots for maybe some lost edges. So here where maybe it's a little bit lighter of a yellow at the top right side of the wing shoulder, I'm going to leave a gap without any pencil marks there at all. Leaving some lost edges can really add some beautiful interest to your painting and make it feel more fluid and like it has some movement to it. Okay, so I'm making little adjustments to the little body shape. And now for the perch, I'm not going to draw the whole thing all the way across the paper. I don't think that would look great for the composition. But I wanted to make it as straight as I possibly can, top and bottom. One of the little toes here is overlapping that perch. Now I'm going to slow down and draw a rounded shape for the top of the foot. Connect that to this longest toe. Erase my marks that are incorrect. Draw the second shorter toe. Okay, and then the feathers down here at the bottom of the breast or at the bottom of the belly are going to be a bit darker. I can kind of plan ahead for that with stronger pencil lines if I want to, but still keeping it fairly light. Your pencil marks are merely there to guide your painting decisions. Okay, so we've got 2 feet, we've got a head shape, now we need to draw a beak. So the beak is an upside down triangle shape, and the tip of it comes almost to the neck, right about here. So you can actually begin with just a couple of tiny marks indicating the widest side of the triangle and the tip or the point of it, and then you can connect those with a line. That's a great way to create a shape without just jumping in right away. Sometimes when we try to draw the shape perfectly in one pass without marks for guidance, we can be a little too hasty and make mistakes. Slowing down, there's the little nostrils, and then once again erasing any excess marks that I don't need. All right, for the eye placement, take a look from the side of the beak to the side of the head. The black portion of the eye is right about in the center, and it's not a perfect circle. It's a slight tilted ellipse or almond shape. Because the head is turned to the side, we're not seeing a full circle shape. So don't think in terms of, oh, that's an eye, I should draw a circle. Look at what you're actually seeing in the reference photo and try to copy that shape as exactly as you can. And we've got a couple of colorful little blue or violet feathers here, and we can hint at some suggestions of the wings along the side, but for the most part we're going to get to paint with some beautiful solid yellow color, and we're going to want to make it as wet as we can so that it just looks beautiful and fluid and transparent the way watercolor does. Now I'm just going to touch up a couple of markings here for the tail feathers, and then we'll be ready to paint. So exciting. Birds are really quite simple to sketch. You just have a couple of rounded shapes, and the feathers can get a little bit tricky, but just do your best. All right, so there's our simple sketch. We are ready. For this painting, I'm going to be using a size 8 round brush. This one is by Princeton Aqua Elite, a size 8 round brush. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to be using quite a bit of my Hansa Yellow Light. If your palette, like mine, is a little bit dirty, it might be a good idea to take a paper towel, moisten it, and then just wipe that paint clean so you don't have any greens or oranges in there. We want it to be as pure of color as possible. And as I said, we're working with primary colors on this painting. Yellow, quinacridone rose, which is more of a pinkish red, and ultramarine blue, which is a warm blue, meaning it leans a little more purple and less green. All right, let's dive in. Really quick, if you're enjoying this video, please give it a like and a thumbs up. It really helps me out as a creator so I can keep bringing you free content like this. And if you love free stuff, check out the description below. There's a link for my Watercolor Jumpstart Guide, which is a 20-page ebook packed with fun projects for beginning watercolor artists. Let's get back to the video. So to begin, soak your brush in clear water. Make sure you have a paper towel or a rag on the side for blotting. And just go ahead and paint in the entire budgie. And I'm going to extend that water a little bit beyond where I left that lost edge, where I didn't draw the entire outline of the bird. And let's just focus on the body for now. So paint your clear water, painting the inside of the head. Just avoid the eyes maybe for now. There's a little ring around the eye that's slightly lighter than the yellow we're going to be painting, so we can leave that clear. Now you notice I extended the water just a little bit beyond some of these edges here, so what is going to happen is some of the yellow is actually going to bleed out a little bit. And maybe that'll freak you out, but let's embrace it for now. Let's just see what happens. Now load up your brush with tons of juicy paint and start painting it in. Just gonna paint around the beak, even though some of it will seep into that area a little bit. Paint around the areas that are not true yellow just yet. Okay, now on the top of the head, I want to leave sort of a shine. So I'm going to paint with thick paint around a little ellipse inside of the head shape, but leaving that untouched with paint right there in the middle. And then swiping along, moving as fast as I can, using really, really thick, creamy paint. Timing is everything with watercolor, and I want to try to apply a second color inside of this bird's body while my yellow is still damp. So that means I need to work quickly, color it in as fast as I can paint in the little feet as well, and then I'm going to rinse that out and reach for my ultramarine blue next. Now it's important that the wetness level of my brush and paint are approximately the same as what's on my paper, not any wetter, otherwise you're going to have some cauliflower effects. So I'm beginning to drop in the blue over the top of the yellow at the bottom of the bird's body, and this is where we see that shadow tone. In the image it looks green, and of course what do you get when you combine blue and yellow? You get green. And I wanted something a little bit earthier. If I had used a more greenish leaning blue, I would end up with a pretty jungle green looking color, and I don't want that. I want something slightly earthy. So I think ultramarine is quite perfect for this. Now I'm rinsing and removing some of that, and as I begin to work my way up, I'm swiping that blue gently up into the body to help it blend, encouraging a soft blend from dark to light. Don't want to bring it up too high. I want to keep the purity of the yellow at the top of the bird. Now I'm going to introduce my red for the first time, my quinacridone rose. Again, I need to keep my paint fairly creamy. And here at the bottom, where the feet meet the perch, I'm going to paint a little bit of my quinacridone rose right down here. Already my paper's beginning to dry. It dries very fast where I live. Now I'm going to mix some yellow and red on the palette directly to create an orange. And start to paint that in here at the bottom. You'll notice where all three of my primary colors are combined, it's almost a brownish tone, and that's because when you combine all three primaries, they tend to neutralize one another and create a brown or a gray. So with these three colors, it's really possible to mix almost anything. Taking that quinacridone rose and swiping along the left side, rinsing and removing some of the paint from my brush, and always drying before I go back in. I think I may have a little too much water here as it is. You'll see it's going to probably cause a cauliflower right there, but that's okay. I do want to go over it one more time with some more yellow. As bright as that was, I think it could still go brighter. So while that's beginning to dry, let's come back up to the head, and I'm going to take my yellow and pink combo, creates this beautiful peachy orange color. I'm going to start to paint in the shadow side of the head, and just go ahead and connect that over to the beak. You'll notice that the size 8 round brush can really accomplish a lot. If you use the flat belly side of the brush, you can cover a greater amount of distance, and if you use the tiny tip, you can paint something as fine as an eyelash. It's really quite versatile. Round brushes are my favorite for that reason. They can just do so many things. Now if you're looking at this area of the beak, it has almost a slightly more purplish look, so I'm going to scoop up a little of my ultramarine in the mix and use that to start painting this portion of the beak. Now I want to leave some of the white of the paper shining through, so I have to be careful not to cover this whole area. The right side especially, there's a highlight right there, so I'm just painting around it. That's called negative painting. And then introducing some more of the pink as I approach the eye here. And using that same color to add a subtle shadow on top of the head. It's starting to come to life and look more three-dimensional as we begin to darken our values gradually. And it's a process. Can't do it all at once necessarily, or you could, but you won't get that same beautiful, complex, layered look that I love so much in watercolor. So here I'm beginning to paint a couple of subtle feathers. Because the paper is still slightly damp, my brush strokes are softening out ever so slightly. All right, now while that continues to dry all the way, we can add some color to the tail. If you want, you could go in quite direct with this. Instead of using the wet on wet technique, it's definitely possible to go in wet and dry, especially when it's a smaller area. So I'm going to take that Hansa yellow light again and go in directly and just paint some yellow over the yellow portions of the tail feathers. Honestly, I think I can just cover the whole thing. When I think about what colors I need to put on top to create this brownish gray, I can definitely do that by layering over the top with ultramarine and quinacridone rose to achieve kind of a similar color as we got on the underside of the belly there. I'm going to mix up all of this on my palette. This yellow and orange, or yellow and pink, creates a nice orange. And I'm going to go and swipe across the perch. Now I do need to watch out for the little feet. They are slightly lighter than the perch. But it's okay if it's a little bit brushy, a little bit messy. In fact, I can go over that again with another layer, so I'll take it across the feet too, why not? All right, so that's a first wash on the perch. While that's drying, let's come back up to our bird's head. To create black, we only have these three colors, but we can combine them in their darkest value. So we'll take our two darker colors, the quinacridone rose and ultramarine, and mix those up as dark as we can. And then we'll add in a little bit of yellow to neutralize that, and then keep adding color until you get a really dark, rich color that you're looking for. Almost black. I think that's pretty good. So I end up with a really, really dark purple. But in such a small area, like in the eye here, it will read as black. So just use the tip of your brush to carefully paint the eye. And I see a teeny sliver of a lighter color along the right side. Yeah. And then we can also use that to paint in those little nostrils. Darken up any little markings that we need to. Try not to outline everything. It tends to look less realistic and more like an illustration if you outline everything. I'm going to add a couple of little markings for the undersides of these feathers. Okay, now I'm going to go a little lighter than that. I still have this purple on my brush, and I'm going to add these little feathers along the side of the head. So I'm using a U shape with the tip of my brush to make it almost look like little scales. Rinsing and removing most of that paint, and I'm constantly controlling how much water's in my brush by blotting on the paper towel. This may seem not intuitive at first, but I promise the more you paint, the easier it will get, and the more you'll start just doing it without even thinking about it. That is controlling how much water is in your brush. You'll start to see as soon as you put down a brush stroke, okay, maybe that's a little too wet, I need to dry it a little bit, or it's too dry, it's not moving along the paper very well, and then you'll need to pick up some more paint. This is just something that comes with logging lots of brush miles and painting often. All right, so this is another layer of that orangey pink across the head. I think that looks nice. Okay. Our bird's body is now dry enough that I can add a second wash over the top. So I'm going to go ahead and re-wet the whole thing, just watching out for those little areas that I painted in detail. This is a great way to fix a wash too. If you feel like it just got too blotchy or splotchy or whatever it is, you can actually re-wet it completely after it's dry. That's an important piece there. After it's dry is essential. And use your brush to gently scrub and move that paint around again. Now I want to add even more yellow, so I'm loading my brush up with Hansa yellow light again. And really just punching up the yellow, making it even more vibrant. As yellow as I possibly can. So I'm going to need really quite thick paint for this. And already I'm liking how this is looking. It's looking more soft and smooth and blended. with this second wet and wet wash. Notice I'm not going over the center area with any more yellow. I want to leave that lighter in value. The more paint you add, the darker it gets in watercolor and the less transparent. So be aware of that and just exercise reserve as you layer your colors. Much more yellow. I'm liking it. Okay, let's come down to the tail feathers. Keep working on these. One more time, I'm going to punch up the color in the tail. This time I'm adding in a little of the orange with the Hansa yellow, making the yellow even brighter. And you can treat the tail feathers with a little less precision because we're going to have some fun with just letting that kind of float away. Taking some of my purple that I mixed up for my dark on the eyes, and this is what I'll use for almost a brownish color on these tail feathers. When you put the purple over the top of the yellow, you do indeed get more of a neutralized purple, so it looks more brown. This is a great tool to have if you apply a color and it looks too bright at first. Take the opposite color on the color wheel. In this case, purple is across from yellow on the color wheel. It's the opposite or complementary color. And layer that or glaze it over the top, and it will neutralize that color and make it less vibrant. Okay, now for the little feet, I'm going to take quinacridone rose and swipe that over the feet. We're working in layers here, so we have to be patient and let things dry. It takes time. This is still damp on the belly, so I can actually apply some more of my quinacridone rose here to the shadow side. I want to make sure it's nice and dark and looks like it's turning downward in space. Can blend that in with the foot. The left side of the bird is slightly in shadow. So what I'm doing now is applying a purple shadow ever so lightly and gently, wet on wet. Our yellow is still wet enough that we can do this without it accidentally lifting. And then I want to restore that center line here in the belly. We don't need any more blue. I think the little bit we added at the beginning was just the right amount to create that greenish look. And then while I'm working with this color, I can also add some subtle little shapes to the head. We see these lumpy little feathers where the head is turning. So I'm creating these almost U shapes, representing little feathers and movement in the head. It becomes more of a gray tone on this side. And I want to be more suggestive with my brush strokes, so I'm just doing a lighter value, lighter touch. All right. I think that part of the bird is done, so now let's come back to the perch. The perch needs to look more three-dimensional. So we're going to mix up our orange again, using quinacridone rose and Hansa yellow light. And I'm going to do a dry brush technique. This is where I scrape my brush along the surface of the paper, and what will happen is it leaves some of the little valleys untouched with paint, so you get this textured look. You can take more of that purple and use that along the bottom. This will help intensify the shadow, the underside. And not every inch of the painting needs to have the same level of detail as the bird's head. In fact, the face is usually the focal point whenever you're painting sort of a animal portrait or a person portrait. The face is the focal point, so I can use less detail elsewhere in the painting and really play with more painterly brush strokes elsewhere. All right, so while that's drying, I'm going to add some splash of color to the background, and I mentioned that I'd love to play with complementary colors in this. So as we said before, the complement of yellow is purple. And I can mix up a gorgeous purple with quinacridone rose and ultramarine blue. And this would be a fun opportunity to play with even like a different brush shape, if you have one. Let's try this. I'm going to take more of a flat wash brush. This is still another Princeton Aqua Elite brush, 1/2 inch flat wash. I'm going to make sure it's wet first. And then I'm going to grab some of this purple that I mixed up, And I want to play up this kind of angled shape. I might need a little more paint, so let's mix up some more. And this is one of those things you have to do quickly in one pass and just sort of be brave. So let's try it here. We're going to start close to the bird to make sure that we're painting nicely around that edge, and use watery paint, and then you can do kind of a splish splash, pull the paint over, and then let's do that on the opposite side over here. Maybe underneath as well. Some of the purple can overlap the bird, that's okay. In fact, we can try to connect the color so it feels more connected. And of course, if you're not happy with that shape, play around with it until you are. You could even add a little bit of spatter for more of a whimsical effect. I think the round brush works better for spatter, so let's do that. Yeah, that's better. All right, so I jumped ahead and just added that because it's fun. I love the look of the granulation that's happening here in the paper. This paper is really quite nice. I'm liking how it's responding to all of these techniques. The last thing I'm going to do is intensify the shadows in the toes. They look a little bit flat, so we're going to create that super dark purple again using all three primaries, and that's actually almost a better black than I had before, so we'll go with it. I'm going to add a more distinctive shadow right here and under each toe. And then a couple more brushy little feather details on the tail. And there we go. There's our finished yellow budgie. Well, that was fun. Thanks for joining me today. I always love painting birds. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more bird tutorials like this. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.